Why would I want my drums tilted forward? Well, the reason why, and this is what I do when I do concert snare stuff, the wrist, if you are playing on a flat drum, is already bent, and you're not going to get the full volume that you could if you could move the wrist a couple inches lower with the stick. So if I'm playing here versus playing right here, that's a whole lot more power that I could get out of my hands. So what I actually do when I'm doing concert snare in particular, sticks so that they're at a slight angle downward, and it does make the sound come backwards, but you're getting more power and you're playing more relaxed because your wrist is more natural rather than already at a bent. Then you kind of make up for it already. If your wrist is like bent up, like if you have an angle, this could cause a lot of stress. Flat, that can cause some stress, but if it's got this like nice downward slope, then that can help out. The way that I've learned how to play fast is the majority of my time over the past like 20 some odd years is I practice slow, very slow. Like we're talking, I'd slow this thing down like when I was really refining it and just like that slow, and really focusing on the technique and making sure that it's as efficient with the motion and with my energy expenditure as possible. So that way I could, when I play it fast, be as relaxed as possible and use the least amount of energy to be able to get in the notes at faster speeds. Kind of like a bit of a paradox in that in order to be able to play fast, you have to refine the thing slow. Folks, gravity still works. Thankfully, we had to test it. Whenever you're practicing, every 5-10 reps, if you can, I highly recommend recording yourself so that way you can analyze your technique both in real time, but also if you can slow it down and the frame rates allow you to like actually see fluid motion with your technique, you can really analyze like what's different between my right and my left hand when playing this grid variation, etc. Now, because I'm practicing this slow, like here's the normal speed for this, you can also look at this at like double time or 1.5 times speed and see, does this look good? Does it look like the technique that I want to use when I'm actually playing through it fast? So this is a helpful way that you can do this, whether you're like live streaming yourself like I am, or if you are like recording yourself with your phone or whatever. Anyone get the shirt? I hope so if you're watching this. So ghost note is when you do like a really small tap. So like instead of going, you lower those even more. You can barely hear them. Little tappy 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 taps. You can also do accents. So you do, or like flam drags. So you turn them into ghosts. Ghost notes. Depending on what kind of technique you're going to use, you're going to develop different kinds of muscles. So if you use a finger technique, you're going to be using a lot more of the tendons along here. But if you use a wrist bend technique where you're moving up and down, you're specifically going to use that muscle that you see right here. And if you do traditional grip, when you rotate, you're actually going to move the bicep up and down a little bit right here. So this exercise, diddle timing. So yeah, you can slow it down to 40, you can go up to 200, etc. That's great. But one of the things that you really should focus on, especially when you're playing this one slow, is the transitions from one measure into the next. Because it goes slurred, normal, rushed, normal for the diddle interpretation, you want to make sure that it doesn't kind of like blur from one measure into the next, but instead is like a cut and paste, like this is a rhythm, and then you're just kind of going to a completely new phrase and new rhythm without actually having any kind of like merger or blending of the two. So when you're working on this, like really focus on those transitions from beat 4 into beat 1 of the next measure and make sure that it is like a perfect new interpretation of the slurred, rushed, or normal diddles. So you're seeing me do this stuff extremely slow, and there's a reason for that. I am practicing the way that I want to play when I'm playing it fast. As I slowly speed this up, you'll notice that my technique ideally should stay the same. That is extremely important. So just because I'm practicing this in the 20s right now, when I get into the 100s and I'm playing through this, we want it to be the same technique. Tasty. It's very good. See what I did there? Cheeses. Question mark? Instead of hearing like zzz, 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 zzz with every single one of these buzzes, the closer to the edge you are, or the rim, the more resonant and the lighter the sound is compared to the middle of the drum, which is going to have louder sound to it. So go with that natural decay of your sticks with the opposite decay that you get with the head itself. So when you're playing the 3-stroke, you play the loudest part in the softest part of the drum and the softest part of the stroke in the loudest part of the head. It's maybe about like a couple of inches that you're moving. So your buzzes actually look like this when you're doing it. And again, you're doing 3 strokes really because you're just trying to make it consistent. And by having it on a concert snare drum, then it's going to sound nice and even because you're going with the loudest part in the softer part of the head and the softest part with the loudest part in the head. So that way you are compensating for that natural decay in this single stroke that you're doing for the 3s. One of the things you could do is change the height of this. Actually, I'll play it on one height and I'll slowly raise the accents as I go. How would you explain the usage of the back fingers in drumming to a beginner? And does the answer change depending on the person's experience, such as wording and detail, or is it pretty universal? So I've worked with every single grade, kindergarten through doctoral students, so no gaps in between that. The way that I work with a kindergarten student is very different than the way I work with like masters and doctoral students because it's just like comprehension levels are completely different. To answer that first question, I completely change how I respond to things depending on who I'm talking to and like their experience level, etc. So even if they are like a doctoral student, I've had many doctoral students who didn't understand drumming, but were getting a PhD in music education. And so the way that I spoke to them was very different than somebody who was also a percussionist who was like performing at that level, etc. So the answers vary depending on what's going on. Here are 3 variations of grid that you can use to work on a rudiment. The first one keeps the rudiment on 1 and moves the accent around. The next variation puts the rudiment before an accent. This is great for working on grid where the accent is on the second partial of a rudiment. And the third variation puts the rudiment after an accent. This is great for working on grid where the accent is on the third partial of a rudiment. These grid variations go from 40 to 200 beats a minute, 1 click at a time, and there are several hundred more at the link at the top of the screen, all for free. This variation of grid puts the rudiment after an accent. In this case, it's cheeses. There are several hundred more grid variations at the link on the screen, and they're free.